Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum. I just wanted to welcome everyone to this program. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Samira Kanji, President of Noor Culture Center, and I wanted to say hello just so that you can see that it's the same old team at this end, even if we don't meet as frequently as we used to. I also want to express my immense appreciation to Dr. Sheikh Khaled Abou Fadl for making time for us when we ask, because you can imagine how extremely busy he is with his ongoing work at the UCLA Law School and is one of the world's leading authorities on the Islamic intellectual tradition. We have admired and been guided by Dr. Khaled's work for decades, both personally and as a Noor Culture Center community. So I'm just going to make it very quick so that we get to hearing from Dr. Khaled. I'm giving you an extremely distilled bio. Dr. Khaled Abou Fadl is one of the world's leading authorities on Sharia, Islamic law, and Islam, and a prominent scholar in the field of human rights. He is the Omar and Esmeralda Alfi Distinguished Professor of Law at the UCLA School of Law and the founder of the Institute of Advanced Usuli Studies, which is a nonprofit educational institute dedicated to ethics, beauty, and critical thinking in the Islamic intellectual tradition. Thank you always for your generosity, Dr. Khaled, and for your truly important work. And so now, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Aziza, who will continue to facilitate the program with Dr. Khaled. Enjoy.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Greetings of peace, justice, and love, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this event on Muslim love, which is not yet another Muslim matchmaking event, but rather is a conversation with the esteemed Sheikh Dr. Khaled Abou Fadl on the vast Islamic intellectual tradition on the concept of love and its implications for how we understand and practice our relationship with God, with each other as created beings, and with ourselves. I didn't truly appreciate just how enormous this tradition, this love tradition was in Islam until I read Dr. Abou Fadl's work, and also concomitantly what a violence has been done to tradition through the erasure and obscuring of it. And so thank you so much for joining us here today, Dr. Abou Fadl. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I'm speaking to you from Toronto, territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the Mississaugas of New Credit First Nation. These land acknowledgements, far from being something performative that we do and then move on from, are rather a reminder that when we are talking about concepts like love, our first obligation for those of us who are settlers on this land, our first obligation of love and justice is to act in solidarity with those Indigenous nations resisting the ongoing colonization and genocide of their lands and nations. In events like Valentine's Day, which we recently marked, we are communicated to us is a very vitiated and restricted notion of love. But in counter to this, social justice movements, feminists, decolonial activists have been recovering and analyzing the idea of love as far from being something that restricts and privatizes our ideas of care, instead is a very powerful resource for thinking about our obligations of care to each other across the boundaries that are normally erected in order to divide us and our struggles from one another. Islam, as Professor Abou Fadl has so powerfully written, should really be known as the religion of love. And the erasure of this is to the profound detriment not only of our understandings of Islam, but also our understandings of love as a resource for bringing justice and beauty into this world. And so thank you, Professor Abou Fadl, for joining us and for engaging in this conversation. We're going to start just to lay out the rest of the event. Professor Abou Fadl is going to begin with some readings from some Islamic texts on love, and then we will have a moderated conversation, and then we will be taking questions from the floor, the virtual floor, in the YouTube chat. So as we go throughout the event, please use the YouTube chat function to put any questions or comments or discussion that you have throughout the event into the chat. We expect and hope and require that this be a safe space for everyone to engage in honest discourse and questioning, and so in the spirit of true allyship and inquiry, and so any hateful comments will be erased. There is, for those who are hearing impaired or who just prefer to have the closed captions, there is an automatic closed captioning function which you can use. I apologize in advance that due to its Anglocentrism, often terms not in English are not captured properly by it. So I do apologize in advance for that. And if you are having trouble with the volume on it, or if you can't hear, please do check first that the volume is turned on the YouTube video. And so without further ado now, I'll turn it over to Professor Abou Fadl, who will start off our conversation deeply grounded in the tradition with some text.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this event, and thank you for inviting me. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So the literature is quite enormous, and there's really an embarrassment of riches here, where you try to decide what of this vastness do you share. But I have compiled basically a few short quotes that hopefully gives people a taste of the kinds of discourse that this literature represents. So I start out with Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, where he writes, "God is the creator of beauty, the creator of the one who does what is beautiful, the creator of doing what is beautiful, and the creator of causes, the asbab of doing what is beautiful. For this reason, love for what is other than God, is ignorance. Whoever knows that will for this reason love none other than God." Nur Ali Shah al-Asfahani writes, "People of mystical knowledge say that husn, beauty, or moral goodness, is the final cause of creation, and love constitutes husn's foundation, beauty's foundation. Moreover, it is obvious to everyone in possession of an intellect that husn, beauty, is nothing other than love. Though they have two names, they are one in essence." Imam al-Attar says in a passage, "When you enter God's presence, your heart awakens. When you taste love, you'll find the key to all the worlds." Ayn al-Qudat writes, "Pay attention. This total love is an obligation on the path for everyone. Take heed that if you can't attain to the love of the Creator, strive for the love of humanity, so that you can see the worth of these words." Ahmad al-Ghazali, who was Abu Hamid Ghazali's brother, but no less an important intellectual and an important figure, writes, "The function of the heart is being a lover. So long as there is no love, the heart has no function. Therefore, it is certain that the heart has been created for love, and being a lover, and for being a lover, and knows nothing else. Fakhruddin al-Iraqi writes in his famous text, the Lama'at, or the Flashes, love is a fire which, when it falls in the heart, burns all that it finds therein, to the extent that the form of the beloved is also wiped from the heart. Sheikh al-Ansari, this will be my final quote, Ishq, or total love, is a burning fire and an ocean without shore. It is the spirit and the spirit of the spirit. It is story without end and pain without remedy. The intellect is bewildered in its perception, the heart unable to grasp it. It makes the hidden apparent and the apparent hidden. It is the ease of the spirit and the outside and the outset of illuminations. Although the spirit is the life of bodies, love is the life of the heart. These are just samplings of literally thousands of choices.
Thank you for sharing those really beautiful excerpts which speak to this vast, as you say, Islamic tradition on love as the fundamental principle creation, and also the fundamental purpose of us as humans to be loving and to reflect that love with which we were created. Perhaps we can begin by discussing what exactly it is that we mean by love. You know, we're so immersed, particularly here in colonial modernity and the concepts of love that arise from that, largely restricted to romantic heteronormative models of love in ways which are very constricting. Love is often taken for granted that we know what it means. It's represented as the ultimate natural feeling, but as critical scholars remind us, it's precisely those things which appear most natural or are taken most as common sense that are where the most power inhere in their production, and therefore those are the things that are actually most important for us to interrogate and question what it is that we mean by them. As you've noted in your work, there are so many different words in our traditions for love. You mentioned ishq, but as you say, there are so many others. And this is really a testament to the centrality of the concept, as well as the acuity and the precision with which love was analyzed. And so can you begin perhaps by discussing with us what exactly is meant by love in these traditions? And is it the idea of what many of us perhaps think love is?
Yeah, I mean, as you noted, there are so many words in the Arabic language for love, and so many words that were utilized in the Islamic tradition. And so Muslim scholars tended to think of love as something that evolves and that grows and that matures. And the dynamic of maturity and growth in love is that love, in its very core, cannot be selfish. It cannot be a selfish thing. They used to express it in terms of saying that love is annihilation, that when you truly love, what love does to you is that it makes serving and giving sweet and profound. You cannot love unless you know the beloved. If you do not know the object of your love, then what you will do is that you will project yourself onto the object of your love and then end up loving a construct that basically mirrors who you are. And so love then ends up being a thoroughly egocentric dynamic, because you actually do not love, you do not really love, but you are coveting. And there's an enormous difference between coveting and loving. And so when the process of learning who you are, so that you can differentiate between the object of your love and the self. But then this knowledge, the knowledge of the self and the knowledge of the other, and the ultimate other is God. But we go in many gradations before the knowledge of God. The knowledge of the self and the knowledge of the other, which allows for this to combat selfishness, that if love is an excuse for selfishness, then it undercuts itself, it undermines itself. And in the dynamic then to achieve the purpose is to achieve a union between the lover and the beloved. But that union in itself is not possible without service. So in loving, you give and you serve. And again, they would express that in terms of annihilation. But what they meant by it is that you would become selfless in giving. Your true fulfillment of your spiritual ecstasy and your spiritual growth would be in this process of service. They would often one of the central core themes here is the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, who says that one of you does not attain true faith until they love for their brother what they would love for themselves. And this hadith and similar or versions of the same theme or the same idea is that if faith is not possible unless you truly love for the other what you would love for yourself, and that is the ultimate in service and the ultimate in sacrifice, is that you actually, the difference between the self and the other has been diluted so much that when I serve you, I feel as if I've served myself. And then the ultimate goal is, or the ultimate dynamic of this is when love becomes, and I guess I've already said it, but love becomes truly a selfless dynamic. Love is the embodiment of all that is beautiful. It is the loftier human attainment. So they literally imagined, or often argued, that the very purpose of the heart, of course they knew that the heart is not a thinking agent, but nevertheless that the symbolism is the point, is that the very purpose of the heart is to love. And that, but there is a huge difference between selfish coveting and the learning how to love. And learning how to love is learning how to sacrifice and how to find your happiness and your pleasure in service. That is, in essence, if you want to summarize the enormous corpus of, because then they would go into precisely how all the dynamics of self-awareness and self-knowledge insisted that a person who doesn't truly understand themselves has the hardest time truly loving. That they often confuse between themselves and what they claim to love, and in fact end up loving themselves under the guise of loving others. So I mean, the writing on this is and there are, I should just, your audience should know that there are quite a few books in English that are quite good about the theme of love in the history of Islam. But again, they just touch the surface because it's such an enormous body of literature. Oh, your mic is off. You're muted. Sorry.
Sorry. Still not as good at as tech as I should be.
Yeah.
Um,
It's okay.
as you said, these literatures really just touch the surface, and they're also working against such an organized and deliberate forgetting of what was the dominant tradition for so long. You spoke about the danger of love becoming distorted into simply a projection of love for oneself, really a form of shirk. And we know in feminist literature, Black literature, anti-racist literature, this is precisely why there is such a critique of the idea of love and the dangers of love, because we've been socialized and educated in patriarchal societies into these very damaging ideas of love. Love, exactly because it's portrayed so often as just benevolent and romantic, has been one of the premier instruments for justifying abuse and exploitation, whether at the interpersonal level with particularly women, expected to perform tremendous amounts of labor uncompensated simply in the name of love, or at the broader societal level with the most horrific acts of violence, from the Crusades to genocidal projects against indigenous people, to extremely oppressive and violent military invasions of Muslim countries justified as exercises of love in saving Muslim women. The abuse of love is so pervasive that some feminist scholars have even said, down with love, abolish love. So can you expand a bit on how reorienting ourselves from this egocentric idea to a theocentric idea of love is fundamental, not only for us as Muslims, but perhaps for people in general, in thinking about how we might recapture love as a force for bringing justice and beauty in the world? And I'm thinking here too of Muslim feminist scholars like Amina Wadud, who speak about how the acknowledgement of that absolute unicity and supremacy of God is what holds all our other human relations in balance with each other, or animal justice scholars like Sarah Talili, who similarly point to how moving to a theocentric framework is actually a really important way of holding, again, our relations with between created beings in deconstructing the hierarchies that we often erect. So can you expand a bit on how we can test these abusive ideas of egocentric love?
I mean, this is part of the plight and irony of modernity. I mean, perhaps modernity is just a way that we express that we try to find a label for the historical moment for that shepherded and introduced the revolution in technology, revolution in system of information, the massive revolutions and transformations in the way that we make and produce and distribute products. And the irony and the paradox in modernity is that we've witnessed the dominant civilization, the Western civilization, with its various cultures that it chaperoned and championed in the world, is this ultimate paradox where there is, on the one hand, a an upholding and a praising and a revering of lofty words like liberty, like self-determination, like freedom, like justice, like beauty, and love. But side by side, at the same time that these lofty ideals are heralded and the entire world is told to trust us, believe in us, in fact, defer to us, because we are the bearers of these wonderful ideals in your life. At the same moment comes in the betrayal of all the ideals with the other hand. And that's really the essence of when we talk about, the colonial era, the destruction of indigenous cultures. It's not an accident that as Eleanor Roosevelt was championing the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 and telling the entire the membership of the United Nations back then was about 50 nations. And as Eleanor Roosevelt and the United States is telling the nations of the world, here is our new international compact, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, all these very lofty, wonderful, beautiful ideals. At the same year, at the same moment, this very same countries that were responsible for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, they had a genocide going on against the Palestinian people, and they were colonizing Palestine and basically telling Palestinians, yeah, you've lived here for thousands of years, it doesn't matter because of whatever. And so part of what we were left on with in modernity, because of the constant bastardization of lofty ideals, lofty words, there developed a deep skepticism about any talk about ideals and lofty concepts like love or like justice or like that. A deep sense of skepticism, not just skepticism about whether we've been delivered any of these ideals, but skepticism about the possibility of these ideas. And this is, I think, the dynamic you're describing. I mean, it's undeniable that, and even till today, you will still hear evangelical Christians that will say racist things like, well, we love you so much that the way we love you is that we want to convince you your religion is garbage. And we love you so much that we want to liberate you from your Islam. We love you so much that we want to liberate you from even having a sense of pride about your national identity or your ummah or your, and
it's like, thanks a lot. We love you too.
Yeah. I mean, it's, you don't, but it is this sort of racist claims of love that are thoroughly abusive, and I'm, does it, as some have argued, that the very idea that if you the very idea in that the Christian civilization or the role of Christianity in the civilization, that you need a savior that carries your sins and suffers your sins, and does that contribute, that type of theology, does it contribute to what the West ended up doing with the world? So, but the part of what is truly sad is the same type of skepticism has and it took the form of the Islamic movement that truly befriended Western imperialism, and that's the Wahhabi movement of Saudi Arabia, that truly found in that natural alliance with Western imperialism and colonialism, that in Islam itself, skepticism of love became such that love has gone from a central theme in Islam to being viewed as a necessarily a false claim to take God for granted. And the trust of people was transferred from lofty ideals that allow for human growth and human development, and an ethical dynamic that has potentialities of growth that at least are like open spaces for moral growth, to transferring our trust into law, from lofty ideals to the mechanics of law. The thing about law, though, is that law, for the function of law, is order and stability, and not growth. The law is not there to allow you to flourish as a human being. Law that forecloses possibilities. It doesn't open up possibilities. The very dynamic of law is to say, okay, here are the parameters for your conduct and for your claims and for your arguments and so on. And by doing this, we've thoroughly impoverished the Islamic tradition. We've thoroughly decimated the Islamic tradition. But, I personally see no possibilities for growth for humanity unless we overcome the hypocrisy and the abuse that were committed against ideals, and regain trust in lofty goals and lofty concepts such as love, such as justice. I mean, look, the reason, as a law professor, I can tell you the vast majority of students of today, even from the time I went to law school to the law, when you poll the law students of today, 99% no longer believe in the possibility of justice, leave alone something like love. They look at concepts and any discourse that even aspires towards things like justice or love as necessarily, by definition, naive, unsophisticated, infantile, and that is a loss for entire humanity. That is the death of humanity, and the death of the planet, and the death of everything living around us. Because if we're incapable of loving, if we are incapable of loving anything, as ironically, our forefathers, when they were writing the things that I quoted, if you do not believe in love, then by definition, you do not believe in beauty. And if you do not believe in beauty, then you commit yourself to the production and reproduction of ugliness and cruelty. And the aspiration to even do better, the self-critical dynamic that comes and says, why were the results so horrible? Just now we've had a train turn over near Ohio, where I am in Ohio, and resulted in this massive pollution. This is an act of lack of love towards the environment, towards creation. We are brutalizing creation, and we don't even feel bad about it, because we look at creation and say, you are here as in an entirely functional capacity. You are here to serve us, and we owe you no love. Entirely absolutely a complete divorce from the Islamic tradition. In the Islamic tradition, if you love the Creator, you love everything that the hands of the Creator touched. And you are not entitled to expect anything in creation to serve you or to give you, because it's actually not serving you. It's sharing with you, giving, partaking. You can't ask nature for a partnership unless you love and expect love back. It's in what we've lost, what humanity has lost with all the material gains of Western civilization. What humanity has ended up losing is nothing short of its soul, because it lost belief in ideals. And by losing belief in ideals, you've given up your very soul.
Thank you for that. There's so much in there that I want to pick up on as we move through the conversation, including, I think you pointed to this actually very impoverished and distorted idea of what law is as well. You know, the Orientalist reduction of Islam as just a religion of law, but that what law itself is represented, you know, to mirror and internalize these projections of Oriental despotism, right? Law as a despotic force, which in the first place, as we know from scholars like Ibn Kamar, was really a projection of Western European anxieties about the nature of their law and their authoritarian systems onto Muslims, which we now seem to have taken on as being an authentic representation of our traditions, rather than something that was built in the first place in order to delegitimize, dispossess, and colonize us. So I want to return to that later, and the relationship between that and recovering traditions of love. But first, perhaps we could pick up on this thread that you started in towards the ends of your comments, in your remarks about the environment, about who it is who we love. As you've said, in Islamic traditions, the recognition of God's love, and that we all come from a loving God, that in turn imbues in us a responsibility to love all that God has touched and all that God has created. But we know that in contrast, in the hands of a neoliberal austerity state, love instead has been used as a mechanism to restrict who it is who we care for. The idea that the loving family bears the primary responsibility for welfare and care is used to justify programs of austerity, for example, stripping away benefits from disabled people if they marry, because now that's seen to be the responsibility of the nuclear family. Love is also used to preclude the possibility of loving and caring, obligations of love and care and justice that extend beyond species boundaries, to non-human animals, to trees, to waters, to all of these features of our ecology that sustain us. But the hadith that you mentioned about our obligations to our brother, in fact, I think speaks to an ethic of care that is profoundly challenging to neoliberal ideas of austerity, and that restrict who it is we're obligated to care for just to our spouse or our children, in a way which absolves the communal responsibility for keeping each other safe and fed and watered, and with everything that we all need to thrive. In contrast, during the coronavirus pandemic, we saw the power of systems of mutual aid extending far beyond these restricted, nuclearized ideas of care, the people reaching out to strangers, and Muslims here where I am in Toronto, and I think elsewhere too, Muslims were at the forefront of delivering these programs of mutual aid that really challenge the state's claim to define who it is that we have obligations of care towards. And so, can you talk a bit about how recovering this theology of love, the implications it has for how we understand relations of care, in contrast to, or even in opposition to, neoliberal state dynamics?
You know, it's subhanAllah, within the Islamic tradition itself, there were all civilizational phenomena, there are always various movements that are represented and not necessarily all consistent with each other. But within the Islamic tradition, the theology of love, those who were committed to a theology of love, would often wrestle with the issue of can you call, if someone says, I care only about my family because I love my family, or I care only about my tribe because I love my tribe, what the very paradigm of nationalism that came with, is that love at all? And people would be surprised that this was often say that they would call this, it might be hamiya. Hamiya is a form of jealousy for what affirms and what upholds your own identity. But they would say it's not love. What you are actually, and pose it differently, if you are capable of not caring about some, are you really a caring person? If your care is bounded and has a boundary, then is it coherent to say that this person is a caring person when in fact they only care about a subgroup? And within the tradition itself, there were those who say to really learn love, you cannot place false barriers and false boundaries to that love. You must love everything that comes from God, good or bad, which means you, in the same way that I will love the ni'mah that God gives me, and I will love the test that God gives me, I will love everything that comes from my beloved, that you in turn must also love the believer and non-believer, the Muslim and the infidel, because they both come from God. It's like, when you get something good from God or you get something that you don't like from God. You must love all. If you don't learn to love all, then in fact, you deny your heart and your soul the knowledge of love, the very process of love. Now, this, of course, at the same time existed side by side with the technocrats, the ones who would read the law and say, well, the law differentiates between the identity of a Muslim and the identity of a Muslim, and our duty to care only extends to the Muslim, and we only care about the non-Muslim to the extent that they are a potentiality of a belief. So it's sort of like we care about you because you could possibly become Muslim someday. And what a lot of Muslims do not realize is what they label as Sufism, and I think that's a reductionist term, was the primary and dominant form of Islam for centuries. It is actually the sort of marginal phenomena, was the phenomena that was constantly try to speak of love in legal terms or legalese, and of black and white, because they had very limited appeal to the masses. They didn't have often they did not have the network of service and help and assistance to the masses that what we label as Sufi Islam was managing of delivering. But in the modern age, the challenge has become all the more pressing, because look at the alternative. Look at what that school of thought that emphasizes legalese and law instead of ideals and norms of morality, including the aspiration for love and justice and so on. Look at what they've done with Mecca. I don't know if recently I saw this horrendous picture of this new Kaaba that they built in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia. Every Muslim should look at this new Kaaba. It is a Kaaba for capitalism. I mean, it is literally this cube built after the image of the Kaaba, where you go in to indulge in absolutely hedonistic consumerism. It is the most profound statement of a people who have given up on an alternative, on anything within the tradition about human ideals or a belief in caring for those who cannot afford their new Kaaba, their new religion, their new ways of worshiping, in the religion of capitalism, which the shrine was built for. The alternative is devastating. It's devastating even to the way we are brutalizing the earth, because we don't love the earth. I mean, to the extent even this new Kaaba, in the promo for this Kaaba that they built, they say, we take you to different worlds. When you enter this Kaaba, there apparently all these things, they say, we take you to the life in the future on Mars. The very idea that, we'll use up the earth, and when the earth is no longer serving us, then we will just move to Mars, which this new Kaaba in Saudi Arabia embraces. That idea where you use a thing and move on, we find it in spousal relationships, we find it in both boyfriend-girlfriend relationships, we find it in career relationships, and we find it in our relationships with Earth. We're going to use you until we use you up, and then we're going to build life elsewhere. It's an entirely hedonistic and godless way of life, because we might worship God, if you would consider that worship. We might perform rituals to God, but we know nothing about God. The most profound, our masterful ancestors would often describe true love as a secret. It is, you pursue a path. The path is a selfless path. The path is a path of service. The path is where you want for others what you would want for yourself. Whatever you would not accept for yourself, you should not accept for others. As simple as that. But the thing is to be entirely honest and honest and translucent with the self, to be able to answer, would I accept this type of treatment? Would I accept this for myself? You see, I mean, this is a much harder question than it appears to be, because most of us delude ourselves about whether we would accept this. If we're completely honest, would we really accept it? But in order to truly protect love, it is when you reach that point of true intimacy with your beloved, it becomes as if a secret. You don't, and this goes back to your question about the colonial expression and the exploitation of the concept of love. You don't use that relationship of love to leverage any benefit. You don't leverage it to say, I have this special relationship with God, so trust in me or believe in me or defer power to me. The more true your love is, the more sincere your love is, the more you protect it as a purely, the more you protect it, and the more you protect the secret of the relationship. I mean, it's not. I want to use the word privacy because again, it's a loaded word, but the more intimate and personal that relationship that becomes, and you are, its only outward manifestation is service. But other than that, it is not part of the permissible outward manifestations to say, well, you know, I have such a wonderful relationship, loving relationship with God, so listen to me, or you have to obey me. And so it is profoundly sad to see all this tradition just sitting there silently, instead of being the very philosophy of life that animate. And as you pointed out, you know, all these modern writings that about love, and whether criticisms of love or calls for reclamations of love, where's the Islamic voice? I mean, the people who've contributed the most in history. I mean, yeah, anyway, I could go on about so many different things, but let me stop here.
Well, I think this is a recurring theme where the very areas where Islamic tradition has so much to offer our current struggles, not just for justice, but for survival, that's precisely where Islam is missing. So often we think of social justice as a project of imagining a different future. But as I've also learned from Indigenous scholars, it's also about remembering what friends at the Indigenous-led Yellowhead Institute call radical remembering, not a reactionary desire to return to the past, but the acknowledgement that people have lived in very different ways before and understood things in very different ways before. And so we can, again, we're not bound to the way that things are now and what's taken as natural and inevitable, and just the way that things have to be. I want to bring in an audience question because I think it relates very well to some of what you were just talking about. So if we cannot love what we do not know, then how can we love the one who is far beyond the scope of our knowledge? Do I need to know a stranger before I can love them? What does it mean to know? And to that, I would also maybe add a query about some of these very abusive forms of knowledge that are used to ground love can take. For example, when courts, but also scientists and ethicists discuss about what obligations we might owe to non-human animals, it often takes the form of trying to discover the extent to which non-humans are similar to us, to which they are knowable to us, in order so that we can grant them rights or feel that we have certain obligations towards them. And if they're not like us, if they're bees or ants or forms of life that aren't immediately cognizable to us, then they're left out of our equations of love and justice. So can you talk a bit more about the relationship between knowledge and love in the absence of capacities of knowledge?
Yeah, I mean, the question, of course, part of the answer is that when love is, I mean, in English, when we use the word love, it's such a vague expression because it encompasses so many different things. So, and here's where, I mean, there is, and let me sort of take it at the most basic level. To have true love, it requires, or what they would call ishq. Some prefer to translate ishq as total love, or as radical love, or as true love, radical love, total love. that is sort of the higher attainment of love, where you grow into the knowledge of the beloved. There, the difference between the self and the beloved becomes inconsequential, because in fact you realize through the growth and evolution and development in this dynamic that there is no you and no me, we are just one. And that in truth, the entire creation, and the creator are but one. And that's sort of the ultimate, the star of Tawheed, is that when I get to the point that I actually fully understand that the difference between me and my dog is entirely superficial. And in fact, the difference between me and all what is outside is entirely superficial. And in fact, that we are one, and we are one in the one and only, our creator. And that when an ant is wronged, I am wronged. When a tree is hurt, I am hurt. When the most minor of creations is violated, I am violated, because we are truly one. That is something that requires perseverance and patience and commitment and belief and dedication to grow into this consciousness. But from the ultimate goal to the starting point where you say, I commit myself to teaching myself that what I would accept for myself is what I will only treat others as I would like to be treated. Sort of, this is like the baby step at the very beginning. And committing yourself to that principle of as an ethical marching point, if you will, as your ethical starting instructions. I cannot have double standards. I cannot have there is no reason for me to prefer the self over the other. You have a long way in your moral growth, and that's part of the beauty of the thing, is that we attain, when we become adults, we begin the journey of moral possibilities, and therefore there is always a goal. And the thing about that goal is, the more you are able to disabuse yourself of your attachment towards the material, the greater your possibilities for your spiritual consciousness and your moral consciousness to emerge and develop. So is it a form of love that you start out with? Well, it's a form of being committed to love. I might not know what love is when I start out, but I'm committed to the idea of love. And the reason I'm committed to the idea of love, because I'm committed to the idea of love, I start out with the basic principle. I have to know myself, not I have to become educated, because you can grow only if you commit to knowing the self. I want to know the self because I want to know my strengths and weaknesses. I want to know what I project onto others. I want to know the way that I might exploit what I desire to assume what is good for others. And I'm committed to this process of self-knowledge. I'm not here to judge anyone else at the beginning, because this is not about judgment. This is about evaluating and learning about myself. And I'm committed to the principle of love is that I treat others like I want to be treated. Now, from here, from this point to the point where you actually understand, you have full consciousness, Allah allows you the metaphysical experiences. Allah blesses you with the metaphysical experiences where you actually are allowed to see reality for what it is, that there is really no table, no chair, no me, that the truth of things is very different than the delusional world, that in the constructed reality that we commit ourselves to. That's a progression and a dynamic of growth and evolution, and it takes discipline, and it takes work, and it takes commitment. But the journey towards love is far more important than the results. As long as you say it is never acceptable that I allow myself to accept anything in society less than love. So in other words, you're not satisfied with the prevalence of hate. It never becomes an acceptable situation. You're never satisfied with the prevalence of ifsad fil ard, what the Quran describes as corrupting the earth. You might not have attained the love of the earth, but you know you're committed to loving the earth. And that commitment, although you might not yet have developed the feelings of true love, but that commitment makes you committed to opposing the destruction of the earth. That's the difference. It's like you start out with, let's say, your partner in life, right? And if you are committed to loving each other, you will wither away all types of difficulties. And eventually, maybe after 40 years of marriage, you will know each other to the point that you will truly become one, that you hardly need to be told anything to know what the other is feeling. But if you're not committed to love at the beginning, the commitment is not there. There's no path forward. It will all fall apart, because when the difficulties come, you say, I'm not committed to loving you. So, ma'as-salama, goodbye. That's the difference. And with Allah, we must be committed to love, which we know is going to take a long time for us to actually have enough knowledge of the divine to truly love the divine. But if you don't have the commitment, there's no path forward.
I want to return to some more audience questions in a bit. First, just a quickie. Someone wants to know if the new Kaaba video is a fake. That's wishful thinking, or?
No, I wish it was. No, it's costed them billions of dollars, and apparently there are all types of virtual worlds inside this thing. And I mean, the writing was on the wall, because for centuries, the Islamic jurisprudence said no building, can be built around the Kaaba that is higher than the Kaaba. And when I saw that rule that has been sustained for centuries, completely overridden and completely ignored, and the modern Kaaba is overshadowed by many buildings that are much taller. We're going down the path of secularism and capitalism and consumerism. When all the hotels that are closest to the Kaaba today are all the expensive, 5-star hotels. So if you don't have money to stay in one of these hotels, you have to stay further away from Kaaba, and you walk quite a distance to reach the Haram. Preference is clearly given to those who are close to to those who can afford to stay in the fancy stuff. That's a commitment to capitalism and consumerism. So I'm part of me is I'm deeply offended by this new. They didn't need to create a building on the image behind the image of the Kaaba, but I'm at the same time not surprised. Yeah,
Or so
at the
there's
same
no
time not surprised.
subtlety, right? I mean, could they be any more
Yeah.
in your face about it? That it's ironic that it's called secularism, because actually it's elevating capitalism as
Yeah.
a religious ideology, or to
Yeah.
serve the role that religion is supposed to play.
I mean, part of do you know that people have been completely ignoring one of the oldest and most noble indigenous populations is Qabilat al-Hawaitat in Saudi. And the whole world has looked the other way as the Saudi government has displaced, destroyed. They've destroyed the homes of the Hawaitat tribe, imprisoned the Hawaitat tribe. Anyone that refused to move, all to build this futuristic city, Neom City. It's against international law. It's a violation of human rights, but it's also a violation of Islamic law. You're coming and you are completely what the Saudis recently did in Jeddah, where they destroyed most of the historical buildings in Jeddah, buildings that have existed since the Ottoman era and even pre-Ottoman era, have all been razed to the ground. And people from the Hijaz and from Jeddah area, tell you that this was quite intentional. It was an erasure of the Islamic identity of Jeddah, and Jeddah is being rebuilt as a thoroughly capitalist state. I mean, another shrine, Jeddah collectively. No, we're unfortunately, those who were raised on the austerity and aridness of law, it was most natural that when they get tired of the legalese and get tired of the austerity of legalistic Islam, that they would throw themselves in the arms of the colonizer and their capitalist ideology, because their intellects and their hearts could not imagine, once you've demonized the Sufi alternative, the only alternative that Islam has known to the austerity of law, once you've said it's all evil and it's all bid'ah and it's all haram, and you've done the same to philosophy. So philosophical Islam is out, spiritual Islam is out, legal Islam now you've rebelled against because you've gone tired of its austerity and harshness. What's left? You either can go towards the communist model, which is not doing very well these days, or you go through the capitalist model. And the Saudi elite are all educated in Western institutions. Many of them speak English better than they speak Arabic. And so it was tragic, but not surprising.
I think it's really telling that, we have debates on whether Islam is more compatible with capitalism or communism, or Islam is compatible with authoritarianism versus anarchism. The idea that there might be other ways of organizing our society and our lives that don't fit in within these very limited colonially derived frameworks is almost completely out of the picture.
Yeah.
So your work and the work of other scholars like Professor Wael Hallaq have shown how the Islamic legal tradition, when situated in its indigenous, organic, philosophical, ideological, epistemological, moral framework, far from being an accessory to the accumulation of state power, was actually a very important check and restriction on state power, right? But that's completely disappeared with the reinterpretation of our tradition, both by external colonizers as well as by internal colonial elites, in order to justify representations and analyses of or interpretations of the tradition that are built in order to oppress, but now get ventriloquized by people on the ground as being the authentic version of the tradition. And we know from across different colonial situations how fundamental it was to colonial projects to demonize and delegitimize indigenous institutions and practices of care, not only between humans, that Muslims love relationships were represented as being perverse or queer, but also relations with non-humans. The fact that the Ottoman Empire, for instance, had hospitals to care for cats was depicted as yet another sign of Oriental, just excess, right? And
exactly.
and waste of resources as of caring for animals is just a, so obviously a waste. Indigenous peoples on these lands too speak to how the the assault on their systems of family and care, which again extended far beyond this nuclearized heterosexual family, was fundamental to the colonial project. And we also know that transitioning away from these violent colonial economies of extractivism and towards economies of care is fundamental for our ability to continue to survive on this earth and not on Mars, for example. So do you see any possibility with the absolute breakdown and destruction of our institutions of care that developed over centuries? What possibility do you see for achieving a decolonization of our ideas of love and care to actually enable us to dismantle these colonial hierarchies of domination rather than just seek to advance ourselves within them?
Any student of history that tells you there are no possibilities, no options, is a bad student of history, because history can be truly surprising, and it can deliver what one never expected. On the positive side of things, if Muslims wake up, let me backtrack for a second. After the destruction of the Ottoman Empire, the Ottomans and the Safavids were the two natural leaders of the Muslim world at the time that they existed. After colonialism forced the Ottoman Empire to retreat in its nationalistic Turkish garb, and basically to convince the Turks that they're just Turks, and the Soviet Union occupied and controlled all these republics that, like Bakhuristan, where Bukhari is from, that had played such important roles in Islamic history. But now what colonialism managed to do is to make Islam primarily an Arab religion. And it's very consistent with what colonial powers always racialized Islam. And in the colonial era, their imagination was that Islam is racialized as an Arab faith. But then colonialism also, consistent with what their image of Islam as a barbaric, legalistic, austere, impoverished tradition. A tradition without philosophy, a tradition without love, a tradition without spirit, because they thought that all of these lofty concepts is exclusive to them. They put at the helm of Islam, and they played a very conscious and purposeful role at putting at the head of Islam this very austere, arid version of Islam that came from the heart of Najd. Now, if Muslims wake up to the reality that the appointed colonial master of Muslims in Mecca and Medina is no longer playing that role, I mean, the de facto reality is that the leader of Islam since the retreat of the Ottoman Empire, or the destruction of the Ottoman Empire rather, is basically saying, I've given up. I'm embracing Western culture, and I'm embracing, celebrating the colonial Asians. In fact, I don't trust my fellow Muslims. I don't want my fellow Muslims. You want to destroy Muslims in China? Go ahead. You want to destroy them in Burma? Go ahead. As far in Palestine, go ahead. We don't. I don't care. That then opens the space for possibilities, and only Allah knows what I hope will happen is that Muslim intellectuals will emerge that will at least engage at the level of someone like Cornel West, just as an example, that reclaim the intellectual tradition. And who knows what type of geopolitical realities can emerge that I think that it is due time, way overdue, that we completely rebel against the idea that Islam is an Arab religion, that we understand that accepting this racialization of the Islamic faith. That's why I'm often disturbed when I find that converts, for instance, do everything to disperse their talk with a lot of Arab phrases, and as if they want to make Islam a foreign religion. They embrace the foreignness. But I don't. The path we are heading, the path that the Western civilization has led the world to, whether we like it or not, we are heading very, very, very quickly to a massive disaster. An environmental disaster that's going to impact us all. Now, what will re-emerge after we reach that tipping point where there is going to be a massive reorganization of the chairs in the game, so to speak, because we will all suffer the consequences of the environmental disaster, the geopolitical disaster that we have been sowing and that we've been ignoring. I just hope that there is enough intellectual and moral capital for Muslims to be serious players when the world will be in bad need of alternatives to the consumerism that has laid waste to humanity. But because the current trajectory is not sustainable, and I think everyone, even when the richest people say things like, "Oh, we're investing in money to develop a program to explore life on Mars or life on other planets," what they're actually admitting is that, yeah, we know that we're heading towards a disaster, but can this exist for another 50 years? I don't think so. It just we're using up the earth at a rate that is simply not sustainable.
The rats leaving a sinking ship. No insult to the rats intended.
Yeah, really are.
Can you tell me then how we think about love in the face of apocalypse and mass death? As you've said, one response to this, it would be to appreciate and acknowledge and act on the understanding that our fates are intertwined with each other, that we can't separate what happens to us from what happens to the insects whose pollination activities are essential to continue to produce what we rely on for our basic foods. Our fate is inextricable from the trees, from the waters. That would be one route. But instead, what we're seeing, as you've said, is an entrenchment of the politics of climate apartheid, where people continue to feel that their safety and security is predicated on the exclusion and dispossession of others. As Muslims, we're often accused of being obsessed with death. There was even an Islamophobic report that came out a few years ago in Canada describing Muslims as lovers of death. But on the contrary, as Black feminist scholars like Bell Hooks have pointed out, it's in fact a Western civilization that has a cultural obsession with death, and that engenders an accompanying paranoia and constant obsession with safety that leads to the justification of very extreme acts of violence in the name of preserving the safety of oneself. And I think there's probably no better illustration of this, right, than the fact that during the pandemic in the United States, weapons manufacturing was designated an essential sector that was made to keep going even as hospitals were collapsing because they didn't have equipment, and so on. And so can you talk about how perhaps reorienting our attitudes towards death and insecurity from an Islamic perspective, which recognizes that we are all strangers on this earth, that we come from a loving God, to God we will return, that we're just passing through this ideal of non-attachment, which you spoke about, how that relates to our understanding of how we love in this life and build societies and social structures based on love.
Yeah, I mean, the difference of first, let's just be very clear that the leaders of the Western civilization have spent on military and military technology is unprecedented in all human history. I mean, it is truly mind-boggling the amount of resources that have been dedicated by these modern and igniting an arms race. And then even some of the most obscene things is that we have an ideological belief that so much technological advancement was driven by military research. And you encounter this all the time. Oh, well, you don't understand that military technology has been the key for all types of advancement in medicine and so on. So even the pursuit of science has the industry of death and the industry of killing the other has been fetishized and sanctified and even sort of rendered sacred in many ways, that not just in the US, but in several Western countries, you cannot touch the subject of military spending. It's as if you are saying, by even saying responsible spending, that as if you are advocating the suicide and self-destruction. And it has reached truly the arrogance of power. And anyway, and again, part of the irony of colonialism is that at the same time it claimed that it aims to civilize the world and aims to civilize the indigenous cultures. As several theorists have pointed out, that the reality was that it forced upon the world what some have called necropolitics, is that the object of their civilizing mission was actually imagined to be already dead. And we see this, by the way, in the way currently the Western world deals with Muslims. No one even cares anymore about who we bomb anywhere in the Muslim world and who we kill. Israel and Syria has just been hit by a devastating earthquake, and Israel chooses this time to bomb Damascus. And reports of 15 civilians killed in Damascus, hardly a footnote, not even a footnote in Western consciousness. No one cares. Now, on the other hand, if something happens in Israel and you had 15 people get killed, this is the definition of necropolitics, is that you guys are already dead to us, and so killing you doesn't matter because you're already dead. Is there a more profound statement of the absolute uselessness of love as a concept in this dynamic? I mean, for you go in, you tell people your land is not your land, your language is not your language, your history is not your history. In fact, you don't even exist to us. In fact, we don't even recognize that you are anything. You're not even, your entire record is immaterial to us. And so you are thoroughly an afterthought, if even that, in the sense that if we need you as cheap labor, we will recognize you within these confines. If we need you to serve in our military, then we'll recognize you. But until we do, and to the extent that we don't, you really have no presence, no existence. Is there a more profound statement of hate than that? And that is the ultimate hypocrisy, is that, and when people, and the difference between the militarism of various civilizations in the past, many civilizations, like in the pre-modern age, there will always be empires and war of empires, and empires are trying to expand and so on. But this type of absolute hate to indigenous culture and indigenous population is unprecedented in human history. The treatment of the people that you encounter on the land as non-existing and as hardly worthy of consciousness, acknowledgement. So the very, how do you even start talking about this? Because it is you matter to me to the extent you are a benefit to me. And that's precisely where all distortions of love begin. Every distorted, ill form of love that ever existed began with this premise: I acknowledge you only to the extent that I obtain utility from you. And that's why, by the way, even most relationships that follow the paradigm of the dominant civilization fail, because I obtain utility from you for a while, and then I get bored. And once I get bored, then I can say things like, well, I fell out of love, or we grew apart. Well, did you ever actually know me enough to love me? Did you actually ever experience anything that can be true love towards me before you say, we've grown apart? Because saying we've grown apart assumes that we actually know, you and I know who we are as people, that whether we are together or apart, that we have knowledge of things. It's an entirely, and that is why I wish Muslims were at the forefront of tapping back into their very rich intellectual culture and using that culture, not restating it, because, scholarship that simply tells us what Hamid al-Ghazali said, or this person said, or Rab al-Adawiyya said, that is not what we need. What we need is those who tap into that and critically engage modern notions of love informed from an Islamic lens. And then we would be making a real contribution to humanity, not just to us, but to humanity. Look at most marriages this is really an important point I want to get off my chest, because it's really, look at most marriages in the Muslim community. The first criteria for marriage are materialistic considerations. Where did you graduate? What is your profession? How much money do you make? And then after that, physical things. How tall are you? What is your ethnic background?
How light is your skin?
Yeah, how light is your skin? That's right. It is obscene. And this is the people, the Prophet ﷺ taught us that when the Prophet ﷺ set the criteria for marriage, it was exactly the opposite of all of that. And basically said, marry, pair the soul. How you read the person's soul, their iman, their taqwa, their relationship to morality and ethics, their goodness, their ihsan. But if we even just put a critical lens at our marriage practices, maybe there's a path forward, because maybe we would start raising our children according to a different set of ethics that are more humanistic, more godly, more decent, more beautiful.
Thank you for that. And you spoke about this wish or desire that we had intellectuals in our communities who could revive these love traditions. But that's why so many of us feel so grateful to you and owe you such a debt for all of the work that you do to reacquaint us with so much of what it is that we have lost of that beauty and justice and love in our tradition. So thank you from
You're welcome.
deeply for that.
My pleasure.
Unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our time, so I'm just going to read out a few final audience questions all together, and then you can respond to them all together, and also include any final thoughts that you would like to. So while muhasabah promotes self-improvement and awareness, how does one not corrupt him or herself with self-centeredness, and instead, by practicing it, provide loved ones with a better version of oneself? And how does the concept of haram relate to love? Are those things that are haram to us those that are outside of our obligation to love, or are they a higher form of love, or different? So the final two questions, and then anything else that you would like to share.
The haram are any moral discipline starts out with basic rules of the game. It's like saying, I want to train you to become a great legal mind. And then, however, in order to be a great legal mind, you have to start with some basic concepts in law. The concept of causation in law, the concept of legal responsibility, the concept of remedies and what remedies mean in law. They set the basic parameters, but they're not satisfactory parameters, meaning these are just the beginnings, the ABCs for your growth. The haram are like the ABCs. They are the beginnings. It's like Allah saying, listen, in order to grow, you at the most basic level, you don't use intoxicants, because if you intoxicate yourself, it's your journey towards understanding the divine is false. It is not real. It is a delusion. You might think that you've reached mukashafa or illuminations, but and don't get accustomed to using things that numb your mind in the attainments of goal in your life. It's like saying the basic rule is alcohol is too destructive. And although it gives you pleasure, but its total effect on society is very detrimental. So learn the path of love by sacrificing your pleasure. That is one of the first lessons for love, is that I'm not, just because something gives me pleasure, doesn't mean I'm entitled to it. I have to think of others, and I have to think of the welfare of others, and I have to think about what's good for the collectivity, for everyone. And that there is no me and you, we are all together in one. So, and that also points to the point about growth. Muhasaba, they always say that muhasaba is not possible without mukashafa, and mukashafa is to constantly confront yourself with your faults, and start out even in the most as training sessions. My teacher used to do that, is that every day you take out time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and you think of what you've done wrong that day. And you ask yourself, if you even if you need to write it down, what did I do? Why did I do it? And do I owe amends? That is the hardest part. Do I owe amends? And if you can't make amends right now, write it down so you keep track of it, so you can pay your bill of amends. That are the baby steps, the beginning of the road for moral growth. If you learn for your own heart to be constantly your vigilant observer, and the agency that always takes you to account, and you anchor yourself in the prophetic principle that there is no reason to assume that I can treat others in a way that I would not want to be treated. If it helps, ask yourself as a moral exercise, if something happens that really upsets you, someone talks to your son or to your daughter or to your brother or to your wife or to your husband in a way that upsets you, and ask yourself, what do I do when I see others repeat the same behavior that bothered me so much when it came to my loved one? Am I equally bothered when I observe that behavior being leveled against the other? And if not, then introspectively look at that as a deficiency of love. The love is like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the more you feed it, the more you nourish it, the stronger it becomes, the more powerful it becomes. And so as babies, we are born very selfish and we have no comprehension of love. As babies, we're born me. It's all about what I want. But the moral growth.
I was a very selfless baby, my mother says.
I completely
I'm very
believe
giving.
that. Absolutely. But we have to, this is the arc of moral growth. And can you imagine if we raised our children with that awareness? If we weren't all like you, born moral, But if we basically constantly reaffirmed in our educational institutions, take account of every good that you do every day and make a commitment to increase the amount of good that you do every day. It is not sufficient to just live constantly from the time you wake to the time you go to sleep. How did I fill my stomach? What did I do that makes me happy? What did I do that entertains me? Where's the service? Love is service. If you don't serve someone, then you don't love them. And rest assured, if you find yourself attaining no pleasure in serving, then no matter how much you tell yourself you love someone, you don't. If you're not willing to serve them, and if serving them doesn't bring you happiness, maybe they're not worthy of your love. Allahu alam. I mean, I'm not telling you that but love is service, and it's liberation in service. When I serve, I feel liberated because I give, and the more I give, the closer I am to Allah. The more I know, the more I give, the more I serve, the more I know for a fact that Allah loves me more. Allah looks upon me and say, you are following my sunnah and by serving and giving, you are following my sunnah. You are dearer to me because you follow my sunnah.
Thank you again, Sheikh Professor Khaled Fadl, for giving us such guidance and inspiration on how we exercise our love muscles tonight in our everyday lives always. Thank you. Inshallah, we
You're
are all
welcome.
now equipped to go out in the world as better, more loving beings,
Inshallah.
expressions of the purpose that we were created for. So thank you again. Salam alaikum, everyone. If you would like to rewatch this video or share it with others, it's available on the Noor Cultural Center YouTube station. So please do watch and share, and please do also check out the Usuli Institute website and how you can support all of the absolutely foundational, vital work that they are doing as well. Assalamu alaikum.